But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Oh, I'm sorry. I got so flustered. Okay, special music, and why did I forget? Because this is one of my most favorite of all people in the music field. It's Carrie Maxwell. Oh, and in other ways too, but.
He was hoping you forgot.
I did.
Good morning. I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather be his than have riches untold. I'd rather have Jesus than houses or lands. I'd rather be led by his nail-scarred hands than to be the king of a vast domain and be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. I'd rather have Jesus than worldly applause. I'd rather be faithful to his dear cause. I'd rather have Jesus than worldwide fame. I'd rather be true to his holy name than to be the king of a vast domain and be found in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today.
Thank you, Carrie. I really love to listen to you sing and play. It's some of the greatest times. So many people here. I can't name them all, but I sure am glad to see Jeremiah here. Come here, Jeremiah.
Good to see you.
Yep, Jeremiah from, he was, what, about that tall? It's good to have you here. I'm still buying books. I didn't think about it, and I should have brought it, but any of you know what the Codex Sinaiticus is? Any of you? A few of you. They have digitally reproduced it, and it was going for about $800. And in one issue of the Christian book distributors, they brought it down to $250, and I said, I got to have it. So I bought it. And I should have brought it with me so you could see it. It is the most complete Bible in the world. It goes back to the 200s and 300s A.D. And it's written, of course, in Greek, but wonderful thing. And I can actually read the thing. The only problem is it's all in capital letters, and they run them all together. So it's like if you were to take a book and run all the letters together, it's a little bit difficult, but I can read it. Nancy Lee, what did you want to say? Oh, it weighs 22 pounds. It's about this wide and that high and that thick. And it isn't all there. I mean, there's some pieces of it that are missing. I'll give you just a little bit of background to it. It was discovered by Tischendorf at the Sinai Monastery, and they were taking pieces of it and burning it to start fires. And his reaction to seeing it being burned was enough to cause them to stop burning it. And he said, can I see it for a little while? And so they let him take it, and he took it up to his room, and he was so excited because it is the oldest, most complete Bible in the world. And through a whole bunch of different ways, this is what happened. They let him have, I think, 85 pages, which he took with him to the University of Leipzig. So 85 pages of the Bible are at the University of Leipzig. The rest of the Bible remained at Mount Sinai, and Tischendorf made an agreement with the Russian government to try to publish what they had, his 85 pages and the rest of it. And so the monastery at Mount Sinai gave, as a gift, the rest of the Bible to the Tsar of Russia. So he made several copies. But since that happened, they discovered more of the Bible at Mount Sinai, even as late as the 1970s and 80s. And so recently, Leipzig, and there's still a little piece of it still in Russia, Russians, whoa, I got to tell you what happened. They had the Bible, and so during the 1930s, the Russian government needed money, and so they sold their portion to the British government for, I think it was £300,000. And the people of Great Britain raised the money to pay for it, believe it or not. And so recently, it's at the museum in London. The museum in London, the University of Leipzig, the Russian government, and the people of Mount Sinai got together, and they had it digitally photographed and reproduced. So that's why it's even available. So that's why I have a copy. Couldn't resist. Greek is my favorite thing anyway. So I just was wonderful to have it. My wife almost fainted when she tried to hold it. But it couldn't resist it. And I finished my book, first volume. So it's Seventh-day Adventists in New Mexico and El Paso, Texas, 1881 to 1909. Anyone want a copy? Okay. Can I have some deacons come up here? Just send me $10 sometime whenever you're thinking about it. Yeah, just go ahead and take a stack. Yes, ma'am. £16. The Bible she held was 16 pounds. Just raise your hand if you'd like a copy. And if you need my address, just ask Wanda. I'm sure she can find out. You need any more? You need more? How many more? I got more out in the car. What? Okay. Nancy? Let's find out how many more we need. Raise your hands. It's right out here. It's a white Prius, 6 LEC 157. It's in a box in the trunk. How many more do we need? Oh my goodness. You probably better bring another 15. I bought 50 of them. So knowing that there'd be some demand. So anyway. It was an enjoyment to do it. It's written in a style that may not be, it's not in a story style. It's in a style of what happened at different points. What were the first baptisms in New Mexico? Who was the first Adventist known to be there? And that kind of thing. So it's all history. And after I had it printed, I discovered a website called Chronicling America that is the Library of Congress has done this, and New Mexico is one of the states that is almost complete. They got all of their newspapers up until 1922 on that website. So I discovered that, and I have taken off a couple of thousand articles off of there, and I discovered a story that I wish I could have had it in the first volume. The man who became the first conference president in New Mexico, Harvey Lee Hoover, his wife and his daughter were driving in Albuquerque, New Mexico in their carriage, and something scared the horse. It ran away, made a right turn to go down, I think, Cole Avenue, and it dumped them, tore the carriage apart, dumped them on the street. And they were pretty bruised and scraped up, but they survived. And it was really kind of cool. What a story. I missed that story. That would be really a cool story to have in the book. Anyway, raise your hands. They have some more books. Raise your hands if you want one. So, how many more were left, Carrie? I hope you didn't take them all. You took everything in the back of the truck? Oh, my word. Okay. If you take them all, that means there's only 16 left. And the whole first edition will be gone. Anyway. And I didn't print it. Any left? You gave them all out? Yeah. You emptied it? Okay. All right. I brought my friend with me again, Neil Thomas, Nancy and my friend. Why don't you stand, Neil? Neil goes to the gym where I go. He goes there 5 days a week and works out. So, anyway, we became friends, and in fact, there's several of us there that kind of hang together. We'll probably hang apart someday, but we're hanging together right now. Anyway, we enjoy going to the gym and everything. The full title, and I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be back. It's just that hill I don't like between us. And I was afraid because of all this rain that we'd have landslides and stuff, but the other side going that way was bad. Coming this way was great. So I hope it's reversed when I go back. The full title to this sermon is, If We Could See, which is the title I put in the bulletin, if we could see the end from the beginning of our life, we would not choose to have it any different. Now, how many have had to have bad things happen to you? That includes the bad things. Because the interesting thing about bad things are they make you mature. They make you a better person. So don't ever knock bad things. We all go through circumstances that are difficult, and a lot of circumstances are uncomfortable. Ooh, you hate them. And we all ask the question, why, God? Why me? Why do I have to go through this? Today I want to kind of pull back the curtains and let you look behind and see how God sees things. These scenes you can only see by faith. You can't see them in reality. And they only become clear exactly what was taking place when it's past and you look back on it, and then you can say, oh, yes, that's why. It's easier. I got to tell you one thing. The one thing neat about this is, as a pastor, I can see yours real clear. And you can see mine real clear. The only problem is we can't see our own real clear. That's where the problem lies. We just can't see that really clear. There are 5 things that happen to you when you go through trying circumstances. Number 1, if you like to write lists, it changes your careless attitude. Up until we go through hard things, we have kind of a careless attitude about life. We have what I call a 20-year-old's idea about life. He's invincible. We think we're invincible until something really happens, and then we begin to look at it and we say, well, boy, it changes your attitude. Because, you know what really bugs me? Young women really bug me. You know why? Because they tend to tailgate you. And I'm saying to myself, young lady, do you realize how close you are to death? If I had to stop really quick? They really bug me. And so I usually get out of their way. Not always. I had one the other day because she thought I was going too slow. I was going to make a left turn, and she put on her horn and stood on it the whole time until she passed me. Anyway, maybe I'm getting old. Number 2, it causes you to rely on God, which in turn makes you a stronger Christian. Number 3, it forces you to make changes in your life you would not make otherwise. You're not going to do it. Number 4, when you change your attitude, it frees you up to dedicate yourself to a greater cause. Because up until then, you're invincible. You think you're only there for yourself. Number 5, it makes you ready to cooperate with God in taking the gospel to the world. Because up until then, you're the only person in your gun sights, so to speak. After that, you begin to see other people for what they really are. Just other people that need help. I'm going to use 2 Bible examples that I love, Joseph and Moses, the 2 guys. The story of Joseph is found in Genesis 37 to 45, chapters 37 to 45, and the story of Moses is found in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But if you really want the story I'm going to cover, it's found in the first 14 chapters of Exodus. These 2 men illustrate what I want to say. Joseph was spoiled by his father. You know the story. He worked, 10 years for his wife, Rachel, and then his father-in-law pulled a horrendous thing on him. He gave him the older daughter, the one who was not so pretty, but the one who had dove's eyes. That's what her name means, the older daughter, Leah. And so he doesn't discover it until the day after the honeymoon night. And he's stuck. So he works 10 more years for Rachel. And it's Rachel who dies in childbirth, leaving him with 2 small children, Joseph and Benjamin. It was his favorite wife, and so this oldest son becomes his favorite son. And then after Joseph was gone, guess who's the favorite? Benjamin. Anyway, Joseph was rapidly becoming demanding, and he felt he was really self-important because of the way his father treated him. You know, we can do that to our kids, you know. We can make them feel like they're the only thing in the world. And it's good for them to know you love them, but they have to realize they're not the only person in the world. Otherwise, they get in trouble. Had he stayed with his father, he never would have been a really important person. Neither would he have been an important Christian. He wouldn't have had either thing, because he was going the wrong direction in what was happening to himself. But you know the story of how his brothers were so jealous of him. What changed his life was when they sold him as a slave. Now, that's a terrible thing, to be sold as a slave. But I'm going to tell you something. It was a turning point of his life. And that first night, when he realized he was a slave, he knew he had to make some changes. Because can you be self-important as a slave? He made a change that night that was to affect him the rest of his life. On the way to Egypt, he was no longer a boy. He became a man. And he realized he was no longer in a protected environment as far as God was concerned. He was going to the New York City of his day, where everything took place. And he knew that he would have to watch his life all the time. See, that's the problem with us. We get so used to where we are, we don't really watch our life. And we get sucked into sin so easy. But he knew he couldn't be that way. It just wouldn't happen. And so even though the sights and sins were all around him, he was one who saw not and heard not. That's the only reason he survived in Egypt. In Egypt, he went from being a slave to prison, because he stood true to God. And even in prison, wasn't long until he was in charge of the prison. Isn't that interesting? And from the prison, he went to the palace. All these experiences brought him to the point where God could use him. And he became God's example for the whole entire country of Egypt. Everyone knew him. Why? Because he saved all the grain and then he sold it out to keep people from dying. Do you think he was known? Do you think his religion was known? Do you think the stands he took were known? You bet they were. It was God's way of witnessing to Egypt in its days when it was at its highest, might say, civilization in that day. It was the most advanced country in that day. He would to see 4 principles, and these are the 4 principles that God used in his life. God used slavery to make Joseph stronger. God used slavery to save Joseph's soul, because had he stayed at home, it may not have happened. God used prison to prepare him to become the second in the kingdom. And God used him to show the people of Egypt what a true Christian really was. And we think about all these bad things that happened to us, and we tend to say, boy, look what Satan brought on me. Are you sure? Or did God allow it to come to help you, to make you a different person? Who knows? Someday we'll know, I suppose. I want you to read with me what Joseph said to his brothers. You remember when they came down? Do you think they were feeling bad? Especially when they had to buy their food to stay alive from the guy they sold into slavery? They were feeling bad. But this is what Joseph said to them in Genesis 45, 5 through 8. Genesis 45, 5 through 8. He says, "Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves, that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 more in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to prepare you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance. So now, if it was not you that sent me hither, but God. Now that's seeing your circumstances in life in a true way. It was God that sent Joseph there. Now, slavery wouldn't be an easy thing to go through, but it did something for him. It really did. Now, Moses. Moses' life was the clearest view you will ever get about how God uses circumstances to guide our lives. And I want to show this to you. God uses circumstances to guide our lives into the direction He wants us to go. He has a plan for every one of you. May not like His plan, but He has a plan for every one of us. Moses is probably the most important man in history of our world outside of Jesus. Think about it. Where else in history were 1.5 million people taken out of a country and created another? Maybe you can find an example. I don't know of one. God needed to accomplish 4 major things in the life of Moses, and I'm going to tell you what they are. Those 4 major things that would have become impossible for Moses to have accomplished in slavery. And that's what he was. Moses needed an unshakable faith in God that would lead him to remain true no matter what. And I'm telling you, in normal circumstances, you don't get that. Number 2, Moses needed an education that would make him able to lead 1.5 million people who had been former slaves to freedom. He could never have accomplished that as a slave. He wouldn't have had the necessary training. Number 3, he needed to learn the alphabetic script, because in his day they were using cuneiform and hieroglyphics. He needed to learn the alphabetic script because our Bible is written in the alphabetic script written by Moses at the very beginning. It was the newest thing on the market. And nothing has exceeded it. And we still use the alphabetic script. I don't care how much you use a computer, you're using the alphabetic script. We're still using it. And God made it so that the Bible was written in an alphabetic script that you wouldn't have to worry so much about translating from cuneiform or hieroglyphics. And he needed that. He needed those things. The 4th thing that he needed, do you know what the greatest thing a pastor needs? That's a good one. Love is a good one. It needs patience. Because members will teach you that if you survive. You need patience, don't you? Because you're dealing with volunteers. You're not dealing with paid people, generally. You're dealing with volunteers. And you need patience. And the people that went with Moses into the wilderness were volunteers. They weren't being paid to go. They were volunteers. How was God going to teach Moses patience? If he's brought into the court of the king, does the king need patience? He doesn't need it because he can. Why have patience? But he was going to need it. God brought all four of these things together. And let me tell you how he did that. God chose very godly parents for Moses, Amram, and Jochebed, his dad and his mom. They were the tribe of Levi. And if you remember, it's the tribe of Levi that remained faithful to God even in the wilderness when they were making the golden calf. So he came from a good tribe. He came from good parents. But you can have a good tribe and you can have a good parents, and without pressure, we sort of let our kids grow up on their own. And you'll see very soon here what God did. When Moses was born, Satan must have known that God was going to deliver Israel. And so a death decree was passed on all male babies by King Tutmos II of Egypt. And when he was born, do you think his mother wanted to allow him to be killed? She made a little basket, and she put slime and pitch around the outside, and put that baby in there and put him in the Nile River, which was the last place she would look for a baby, wouldn't it? And then she had her 12-year-old daughter watch to make sure nothing happened to the baby. And it was put in the reeds so the water wouldn't take it away. So it was just sitting there. And then the seemingly worst thing could happen. The daughter of the man who had passed the death decree came to the river to wash herself and saw the basket. Now, what would you normally think if you're a 12-year-old girl? Her baby brother's about ready to be dumped. But this woman, whose name is Hatshepsut, a very famous woman in Egyptian history, was not able to have babies. Now, do you think that was God's planning? She wasn't able to have a baby. And she needed a baby. You know why she needed a baby? Because she wanted the kingship to go through her bloodline, not through her half-brother's bloodline. And when she saw this baby, she got an idea. I'm going to make him the next king of Egypt. Miriam came up and she said, "Do you need a nurse for the baby?" She wasn't able to nurse the baby. So she nursed the baby. His own mother nursed him. His own mother could safely take care of him without any fear of any interference or death on the part of her baby. Now let me ask you a question. Since she knew that this baby was going to be taken from her at some point, how careful do you think she was in raising him? Do you think she would have been that careful otherwise? I don't think so. She taught this baby to hate idolatry. She taught that baby what idolatry does. She taught him the fear of God. And she taught him the love of the truth and the love of justice. And she did a really great job. You know that? Because it says in Hebrews, when it came time for him to make a decision, it says that he would rather suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, being Pharaoh of Egypt. And then this mother prayed like she had never prayed before in her life, that her son would be protected and that he would not forget all the things that she had taught him. But she couldn't give him some of the things he needed. But his adopted mother could. And she gave him the best education available in the world at the time. And this is where he learned about the alphabetic script. This is where he learned how to use it, and he adapted it to the Hebrew language. And contrary to the movie, The Ten Commandments, Moses knew who he was the whole entire time. I can imagine him, because he had to be trained in all the rites of idolatry. I could just imagine him arguing with the priests of idolatry. And they couldn't do a thing to him because of who he was. So was he a witness? Yes, he was. God worked with Moses, and he used the awful situation where he killed the Egyptian to take him off out into the wilderness and teach him humility and patience by herding sheep for 40 years. And believe me, if anything can do that to you, that will. Sheep, I wouldn't call them dumb animals. But you know, you can take a sheep and cut its throat and it won't even cry. You try that to a goat. I had some neighbors that were Filipinos, and they would kill a goat every Sunday. And because that would be their food for the week. And they lived next door to me, and that goat would cry. Oh, sounded like a baby. Child, you know. That goat knew what was happening, and it wasn't happy about it. So goats are a lot different than sheep. But I want to tell you something else. After Moses fled, and this is what is so interesting. The Exodus, according to the conservative way of which our church sees it, happened somewhere around 1450 to 1445. Okay? If Moses was 80 years old about that time, that means that he was found by her somewhere around 1530 to 1525. She was a young woman. And when her dad died, she ruled Egypt as Pharaoh from 1504 to 1486. And if you look at the timeline, somewhere around 1586 is when Moses fled. See, as long as Moses was there, his uncle, who became Tutmos the third, could not touch Moses' adopted mother. He would have had to have fought Moses. And Moses was leader of armies. He couldn't do it. But after Moses left, Thutmose III, we believe in Egyptian history, killed Hatshepsut. So the 40 years that Moses was in the wilderness was the 40 years that Thutmose the third ruled Egypt. So when Moses came back, it was the man who killed his adopted mother that he faced. And I don't think that Moses was ignoring that fact. So it was probably pretty in his mind, I'm going to enjoy this. He got revenge on him because that guy is the one who died in the Red Sea. And his son came to the throne very suddenly, not expecting to do that. I think that is all extremely interesting when you look at history, all those things. We hear these stories. We hear them all the time. We get used to them, and they don't mean as much to us anymore. But if you really think about it, do you think that Moses enjoyed being taken from his godly parents and being put in a position in the palace the way he was? Probably didn't like it very much. Do you think he enjoyed having to learn all the ins and outs of idolatry? I don't think so. But it was being forced on him. And that's a difference between choosing to do it. It must have been really hard on him. Do you think he ever wished that he could go back with his godly parents and just live a normal life? Sure he did. But God had something in mind for Moses that was greater than Moses' life. And God was going to accomplish that by whatever means he had to do it. It was God's master plan for Moses' life. God knew Moses. Moses was the greatest intellectual giant of all time. He was a historian. He was a poet. He was a philosopher. He was a leader of armies. He was a legislator. When you look at his life, there was no one else like him in history. Not even David could come up to his style. And because we are sinful, we're all sinful, every one of us. Because we're sinful, we don't always, let's say, we seldom see ourselves truly. We really don't know ourselves. We do not understand our own weaknesses. We seldom discern the dangers that are all around us. And we seldom discern our own eternal needs. And we certainly don't usually see God's needs in the world, because that's the big picture. But you know, there's someone who does know all that. And he knows all the things that we need. So God leads us in a way in which we have to make the changes we need to make. The only thing is we have to cooperate in that. God will never lead us in a way that will do us harm. He will always lead us in a way that will make us the best. But we, being sinful, sometimes feel that God doesn't understand me. He doesn't hear me. He doesn't realize my circumstances. And we feel like we are being unjustly treated. That's the way we feel. but God knows best. And so he allows circumstances to come that just really irritate us, that we wouldn't go through if we had a choice. But it causes us to make changes if we want to survive. Because of our sinfulness, we do not discern that it is the hand of God that is leading us in the right direction, leading us down a path that we would not choose if we were choosing it for ourselves. And I would like to challenge you with this. This is a new year, not very long, 20 days into the new year. 21 days, sorry. So I'd like to challenge you with this. We're told if you can't change your circumstances, what do you do with them? You accept them. You don't have a choice. And by accepting, you are putting trust in God. Right? Because he knows best. And if he needs to change it, can he change it? He certainly can. Commit yourself to him. Trust him first. Commit yourself to him. And by faith, believe that he is leading you in the right way, even though you may feel very uncomfortable. If you make the above commitment, I'm going to tell you what will happen. You will gain the victory over yourself, because that's your greatest victory you'll ever gain. You will eliminate evil traits, because God will design it so that it'll do that. And you will experience eternal life. And in the end, when you come to the end, you can look back on it and you can say, wow, I see how God was leading. And you wouldn't choose to be led any different. I'm going to tell you my own story for just a moment. When I was 4 years old, my parents divorced. It was the most horrendous thing that I've ever gone through. And I hated it. And when I was in school, the kids would tease me and said, "You don't have a dad." Oh, what would that make me do? But from my point of view now, looking back on it, I see something that I didn't see then. My mother was toe the line, baby. It was black and white. No turning this way, no turning that way. It's black and white. My dad was real loving and kind. My dad, when I was a grown man, would take me in his arms and tell me he loved me. Which would I have followed if I had stayed there? I'd followed my dad. It was bad enough I followed my uncles. But I would have followed my dad, and my dad was not a church goer. I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be here speaking to you. So God knew that he had to lead me this way. And he put me in touch with the most important person in my life. Because when my mother left my dad, who did she go to? Her mother. And my grandmother was a Bible-believing, story-filled person who had heard Ellen White speak. Her family were in Battle Creek in 1894 when Ellen White said, "There's too many Adventists here, get out." My family left. I heard all these stories from her lips. She put within me a love for history that I can't shake. Isn't that wonderful? God put me with the person that would have the greatest influence on my life at a time when I was the most influenceable, you might say. And looking back on this whole thing, I say, I can see what God did. I'm not even at heaven yet, and I can see what God did. As you look back on your life, you need to look at the things that happened to you, even the bad things, and say, where is God in this design? Because he'll lead us in the right direction. It's said very succinctly in Romans 8:28, and we know that, how many things? All things work together for good to them that serve the Lord and who are called according to his purpose. God bless you all.
Turn with me in your hymnals to number 516. All the way my Savior leads me. Let's stand together.